Okay, so welcome back to Photoshop. I'm coming to you today from my son's room. He's on vacation at the moment. And I'm going to be covering exercise 5. I'm not going to actually do this tutorial in the video. There are some very easy steps to follow along with, although there are a lot of steps, so it does take a little bit of time. But I'm going to cover a couple of the more important steps here. So let me adjust my camera and we'll take a look. So when you're in the assignment page here, just click on the link. You will find that it has up front what it's going to look like in the end. So basically you're making this space scene in Photoshop using only a couple of textures, okay? So the two textures are this rust texture and this grunge paper texture. What you can do is you can click on these links. The images, the texture images will show up here, and then just usually you can right click or control click and save image as, or save it to the desktop. Okay, so that's the texture, and this is the other texture. Okay, and that's all you start out with, and you will end up with an image that looks very much like this. Okay, so oh, looks like my daughter is trying to sneak into the room. But so the first thing you need to keep in mind is when you are selecting a circle here, make sure that you're using the elliptical marquee tool. And when you go to select it, it's really hard to see here, but it's very hard to end up with a perfect circle unless you hold the shift key. If you click and hold the shift key, then you will end up with a perfect circle, not an ellipse. Okay, so make sure you're using the circle key or the shift key to make your circle selection. Then you'll be duplicating that layer, and this is the beginning of the your planet. Okay, just that plain texture. Now, the next step is to do a bas relief filter, okay? So the thing you need to make sure when you're doing bas relief is that your foreground and background colors right here are black and white. And I'm going to show you why. So I have mine as red and green. With my circle selected, and if I go to filter, I think you need to go to filter gallery, under sketch, and choose bas relief. It's the first one. See how my planet color ends up being red and green? Okay, so feel free to experiment with this if you want to try different colors, but just know that the way this is going to be added, it's going to be made as an overlay. It may or may not end up looking how you want it to look. So if you want to experiment with different colors, that's fine. But if you want to follow with how the tutorial is going, what you want to do is make sure that these are the default colors. And you can click this the tiny black and white little icons here to make it the default black and white. And then if we go back to filter, filter gallery, sketch, bas relief, you'll see that the texture looks a lot more like it is in the example. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Let's go through the other steps here. So when it's saying control click, this tutorial is made for a Windows machine. This will normally be command click or yeah, command click, your little Apple key. So if I command click, what's happening is it's hard to see, but it's selecting the pixels in this layer. So it just has a circular selection around this layer. So a lot of times it has you do the command click or control click to select the pixels. It's just like right clicking and going to select pixels here. That's the same thing. Okay, and then you're doing some blending mode adjustments and then some levels adjustments. You're going to make the background layer black. You're adding an inner glow. Make sure you follow these steps carefully. Some students, most of the time it ends up okay, but some students say that their outer glow isn't working. It might be because they have something selected that they shouldn't, but just be careful with these steps and make sure your selection is where it should be, or that you don't have a selection to get this outer glow. And then finally, as you're going through these steps, you want to make sure, for example, that you are hiding what's going on behind the planet. So for example, we have this, eventually you end up here, and then you're going to make a second planet up, up in the right hand corner here. But we're adding, for example, this grunge texture to the background that makes it look like we have some stars in the background. But without a layer mask here, it looks like these stars and texture are, we can see them through the planet. And that's not what we want, right? We can't see stars through a planet. So you need to make sure that you're adding the layer masks onto layers that should appear behind the planets, so that it doesn't appear like it's a see-through planet, right? So it is in darkness, but that doesn't make it see-through. So make sure you're including layer masks for stuff like the stars. So if I disable this layer mask, then we have these stars that I can start to see through the planet. Make sure you're adding those layer masks back in. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. See here you can adjust the planet color. So I would just say stick with the black and white for the bas relief. Adding stars. Some textures. Okay, this step, when you're adding this kind of light source, after you're going to use your polygon lasso tool, and you can just kind of make a shape here. Okay, once you do that, you can fill that shape, edit, fill it with white. Oh, I was in a layer mask. Let me make a new layer here. I'm going to go to edit. I made a new group. Let me make a new layer. Okay. Edit fill. I'm going to fill it with white. Okay, once you fill it with white, press Control D or Command D to deselect what's in that layer. Otherwise, the next step is not quite going to look right. So once you deselect it, then you can do your filter and blur. Okay, because what happens if you don't deselect it, it will only apply the blur inside of the selection, and it will end up with a hard edge, which you don't want. Okay, so make sure you deselect in that step. I think I might have put a note in here. Yeah, Control D to deselect it. Okay, I added that in because I forgot that in the tutorial. Filter. So you're going to be doing the, I think the radius twice. You're going to do a couple of these twice. Okay, then you're going to add some color into your light. The next step is you're making a guide for a lens flare. You're going to be adding a lens flare into the image. The thing is, in my experience, like this tutorial has you make the guide, and then it has you go in to make the lens flare, but when you're in the lens flare dialog, you can't actually see the guides. So do your best. If it works for you that you see the guides when you're in there, great. If not, just try to get it in there. The other thing with making this lens flare is it's an important step that you fill the layer with black, okay? So it's telling you to make a new layer and then fill it with black. If you make a new layer and you don't fill it with black, then you can't actually create the lens flare. You can't create a lens flare in an empty layer. There's got to be something in the layer. So that's why we add black to it. And then we will change the blending mode later so that only the lens flare fills, or that only the lens flare shows up. Okay, so make sure you're adding black before adding the lens flare there. Okay, and then the rest of the steps, you can adjust some hue and saturation. You're going to create a smaller planet. One thing you could choose to do, and like it has you repeat steps 2 through 18 to make the smaller planet. If you're comfortable just maybe duplicating all your files for the original planet and then rotating it and possibly adjusting it a little bit, you can do that. Um, but you may find it easier just to create the small planet. Then you're going to add some space dust in front with some colors. Let's see. The um, the gradient layer. This is saying create a new layer behind everything except for the stars. You're rendering clouds. Okay, and then you're doing a gradient overlay on top of the clouds. So the gradient overlay, if you go into styles, this little FX here, and go to gradient overlay. Okay, and from there, to get to the dialog box for the gradient overlay, just click inside of this. Okay, so you click here and it will pull this up, and then you can add these color points to the, I don't know if it's telling you what the color points are. Just try to pick a blue or another color kind of similar to this, but to add color points to your gradient, just simply um, click along the bottom of it and see how it's adding these points. And from there, inside of those points, you can go in and try to select, a color close to what the tutorial is saying to use. So it starts off with kind of a darker blue, and it gets into kind of lighter blue, um, etc. So that's how to get to your gradient editor and add color points to that. Okay. And you're using layer mask to hide clouds in front of the planet where they should be behind. It's saying adding a light reflection. Okay. And then at step 54, you can be done. This as I've noted here, this does continue. Feel free to change. I'm sorry. Feel free to continue with the edits that he has here. But basically, he kind of backtracks at this point and decides to make adjustments to things he's already done. So you don't need to worry about that. You can stop at 54 and submit it, or if you choose to continue editing through these steps, you can feel free to. But as far as I'm concerned, you're done at step 54. So that's it. The tutorial is very straightforward. There were a couple of confusing points to it that I think I've corrected in my version. So go ahead and get started on it, and let me know if you have any questions.